Ladies and gentlemen, we are ready to start our new session. Please, can you come back? I warmly welcome the next set of speakers, Dr. V. Anant Nageshwaran. Namaskar, sir. Very welcome. Dr. Anjali Majumdar, Mr. Narayan Vaidyanathan, Dr. M. Vidyasagar, Mr. Shekhar Sivasubramaniam, Professor Mikolai Jan Piskorowski, Debjani Ghosh, Sri S. Krishnan. And once all of you have taken your seat, I would be very happy to hand this over to our session chair and moderator, Dr. V. Anant Nageshwaran, to take it forward. A very warm welcome to all our speakers and the panel. And Dr. V. Anant Nageshwaran, may we request you to take it forward? Yes, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I think it is quite tempting to say that CII has kept the best for the last. I'm told that Secretary Mr. Krishnan will be joining us very shortly. The title of this session is The Threat and Opportunity from Technology, Being Thoughtful. Or I could have added being thoughtful, careful, purposeful about artificial intelligence. Given that there is so much to be said, both in terms of the potential, the possibilities for good and bad, no wonder CII has packed this session with a chairperson plus 7 panelists or experts. I have 9 minutes according to the screen in front of me for my opening remark. Let me see if I can give back some 3-4 minutes given the number of people we have to my fellow panelists. Going back to, let's say, between 1980 and 83, when I was an undergraduate student in Madurai, I remember going for an intercollegiate competition at the Regional Engineering College, Trichy, REC Trichy, Tiruchirappalli, as they used to call. And my team from American College, Madurai, made it to the finals of the debating competition. And the topic given to us was, in the finals, I still remember that very well, if God did not exist, would it be necessary to invent him? So I remembered that question as I was driving to this hall this afternoon. So if AI did not exist, would it be necessary to invent it? Would have been the question I would have posed 2 years ago or even 5 years ago. But now that's a bit of a moot question because it is there with us. But that question makes me think about what is it that in the state of the world, in the state of the global economy or society that made it necessary for this technology to emerge. You might even wonder this entire frame or framing of this issue on my part is flawed, and I'm deliberately making it that way. Because technological innovation, inventions happen not because there is a particular problem to solve. If that turns out to be the case, that is serendipitous. Technological evolution doesn't necessarily arise as a response to some set of problems. That is one way of looking at it. But once they evolve on their own, it is natural that they give rise to both costs and benefits, depending on the horizon over which you evaluate its utility. Sometimes given sufficiently long horizon, its negative manifestations may surface, or the negative manifestations may be there in the short run, but they may get ironed out through public policy collaboration, trial and error, societal responses, etc. So now, in the developed world, one can say, for example, with aging populations and lack of additions to labor force, there is a good case for technology and something that replaces both white and blue collar or semi-blue, semi-white collar workers with technology. Maybe this is what the doctor ordered. Or for that matter, as the initial briefing remarks given to me say, that artificial intelligence has tremendous potential in healthcare, in agriculture, in finance, in terms of making access to finance easier, or for that matter, in collecting taxes, etc. So whether we like it or not, it is there as a technology, and therefore we better work on making it work for all of us, minimizing its downside and maximizing its potential, and ensuring that its downside, particularly for a labor-intensive economy like ours, because when you see headlines such as a company which had a 40 times growth in transactions ended up laying off 60% of its staff because AI enabled them to do so, doesn't make for very encouraging headlines. And this was one such headline a month ago in the newspapers. So, in order to debate all these dimensions, from a Western angle, from a developing country angle, from a policymaker's angle, from an academic's angle, and from a scientist's angle, we have Dr. Vidyasagar there, who is also in the corporate world and in the academic world. So we have a very eminent set of panelists. Each of them have been given 10 minutes. And given the background with which they come from, Dr. Anjali Mazumdar is from the point of view of a think tank research institution. Mr. Narayan Vaidyanathan is from the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants. Dr. Vidyasagar, as I mentioned, Fellow of the Royal Society, and SERB SERB National Science Chair and Distinguished Professor at IIT Hyderabad. Mr. Shekhar Subramaniam, Professor Piskorski, he told me not to bother, pronouncing the first name. He said, please call me Professor Piskorski, that's fine, so I'm doing that. Otherwise, I don't want to mangle up his first name. Then Ms. Debyani Ghosh, formerly with NASSCOM, now with the Distinguished Fellow with Niti Aayog, and Mr. Krishnan, who will be arriving very shortly, Secretary, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. So I don't think we could have asked for a better panel in terms of the depth and versatility of experience and expertise. So in the order in which the names are listed in the sheet in front of me, I'm going to call upon Dr. Anjali Mazumdar to share her initial thoughts. I'm glad that I gave back 4 minutes and 12 seconds to my panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I've enjoyed my time here so far with some of the sessions that I've attended to get different perspectives. I'm going to start off with saying I'm not an economist. And I say that in part because yesterday I found that I was surrounded by economists and couldn't quite contribute from that perspective. I do have a technical grounding coming from computer science and statistics, but have also dabbled in sort of human rights and law, which means that the work that I do is at the intersection of really research, policy, and practice. And I'll give you my perspective and the way that I have approached the current work that I do at the Alan Turing Institute. So as we heard, of course, that AI is transforming societies and economies. And it really underpins many other technologies and has proliferated society. So whether we realize it or not, it has already been a part of our complex ecosystem of how we interact with different systems, whether that be healthcare, transportation, justice, healthcare. And it's also informing our understanding of science, medicine, climate, development, amongst others. And of course, we can see this with the recent Nobel Prize winners. I'm going to put forth two considerations that tend to direct some of my work, which is recognizing that developing and operationalizing AI technologies requires considerable material infrastructures, which can have complicated geopolitical implications. And the functionalities of AI are produced by many actors and firms working together in supply chains and networks with various business structures, materialities, logics, geographies, technological and labor implementations. And these are not always visible to the actors or stakeholders in the supply chain or ecosystem. And these systems, which I refer to as socio-technical interventions, have often demonstrated to be biased and discriminatory. Why? Because these systems are based on data of our own making, data based on decisions we've made, how we've chosen to collect the data and on whom, and in the ways that we have done so. which often means that we're doing this based on incomplete information. So if these systems are not designed, developed, deployed, and governed carefully, there is a risk that AI and related technologies risk doing more harm than good to communities within a state and across the world, exacerbating inequality, infringing on human rights, and being unlawful. So my work aims at requiring that we need both technical and other mechanisms for ensuring that systems and their operators behave appropriately, aligning with human rights and meeting legal and governance requirements. But similarly, legal and governance and other interventions must be aligned with technical realities in such a dynamic normative environment. So I'd bring about sort of case studies of what I've worked on, such as digital identity systems, but in the humanitarian sector. And how did this differ from deploying digital identity systems just for your states and residents? This gets complicated because it's recognizing whether or not you recognize as a state certain individuals as refugees or illegal migrants. And that determines whether or not they have a functional or a foundational identity that they have access to, which gives them access to services. And when, as much as these systems can provide inclusion, there is also a risk of discrimination and surveillance, so going beyond how these systems are used. And also that it's recognizing that it's not fully inclusive, that even if it does, that often they are challenged by various know your customer KYC sort of issues in terms of a financial perspective. So we need to recognize that there are much more complicated systems and structures that need to be considered when we're developing a system. It's also to recognize that one of the big sort of approaches around AI is this part around discrimination. And bias mitigation has been one of the largest focus around this. And one of these approaches is around participation. Participatory AI or machine learning in our space, but there's always a risk of participatory washing. So a lot of my work has focused around developing frameworks and approaches to how we can do meaningful participation, recognizing who the stakeholders are, but who are most impacted by these systems and including them. There is a question about when they are included and in what ways, so that they understand that there is some sort of meaningful contribution to what they say and that we're not further exploiting them. This also requires that while we're investing in innovation, that we also invest in participation in order to scale, in order to ensure that these systems are inclusive and to understand what the diverse needs and perspectives are. The other focus for me in particular has been recognizing that while systems are being developed, some by large corporations and others by small corporations, that they are being transferred to other geographies and local contexts. And that often what is more important is to work with local communities and actually their ability to build their own systems. So for instance, working with colleagues in Argentina around generative AI and health, it's working with the machine learning community there, or in South Africa, so that they understand how to incorporate challenges and issues around apartheid that others that aren't in that context would necessarily understand or recognize. And so part of this is to recognize, if we're going to be inclusive, is not just transplanting technologies across the board, but is really working with local communities on building these systems for them. So the three sort of main pillars that I tend to focus on as driving this work is around accountability, inclusion, and rights, which I believe will help to ensure that the way that we develop these systems are more human-centered. I do sort of recognize, though, that trying to build a system that is inclusive or that benefits all is actually a wicked problem. if we build a system, it might be inclusive, but it might have unequal impact for various groups in an inclusive way, and how much. And we need to determine what those values are and what we're trying to determine in a system and in an ecosystem as well. I think I will leave it there.
Thank you, Dr. Anjali Mazumdar. I think just I will leave one thought with you. You don't have to answer it right now. If picking on one of your earlier sentences, if AI learns from our data on our decisions which are based on our own information, biases, prejudices, customs, practices, etc., what is so different from how humans themselves learn from their own past decisions and behavior? Why should that be a major concern if this is how in general we all make our decisions? So I do expect some of the other participants to offer their, hopefully, a different perspective on this matter when their turn comes. So I'm going to turn to Mr. Maybe instead of having two persons from the United Kingdom follow one another, I'm going to break the order. I'll introduce an Indian in between. I will request Dr. Vidyasagar to make his initial remarks, and then I will call upon Mr. Narayanan Vaidyanathan. Please, Dr. Vidyasagar, please.
Where is the clicker? Okay. I hope you can all see the slides. Yeah, no, that's fine. There's the forward and back. Yeah, thank you very much. Anant made some comment about some of the young people in the audience, which easily excludes me. I think I'm the oldest person here by a long margin. So I was told I have 7 minutes, now 8 minutes. So I made up some slides just to focus thoughts. So the starting point is, what is India doing in AI? I think people may or may not be aware. So in the February 2003 budget speech, the finance minister announced that we're going to set up 3 centers of excellence. And finally, in October of 2024, that is 20 months later, the 3 centers were finally announced. Now, AI as a technology changes roughly every 6 months. So we have lost 3 intellectual generations from the time we made the announcement to the time that the centers were set up. This is really not acceptable. And what is the outlay? Well, it's 990 crore over 5 years for 3 centers. Now, there's an arithmetic mistake on this slide. So that is 66 crores per center per year. So that's about $8 million per center per year. This is almost like coffee and snacks budget at a major IT company. We're not going to make any impact at this kind of an outlay. We have to spend a minimum of 2,500 to 3,000 crores per year if we are to make an impact at all. And what about the areas? The focus areas were agriculture, health, and sustainable cities. For me, the most glaring omission is, where is education? In my opinion, education is the area in which AI has the greatest potential, especially if you are talking about inclusivity, right? So the challenges in using AI in this particular context of promoting inclusion is, number 1, you have to develop the appropriate technologies, and number 2, you have to disseminate these technologies. So if I were to ask the people in the audience, when you hear AI, what comes to your mind? Anybody wants to mention? Any brave souls? Well, I think everybody is too, yeah.
My mind comes as if I lack intelligence.
I didn't hear what you said, unfortunately.
He said, in his mind, it reminds him that humans lack intelligence.
Okay. No, I was going on a different tack. So my point was that I think most people would say ChatGPT. That's what comes to their mind. It's a bit unfortunate because AI does not begin and end with ChatGPT. There's a whole lot of stuff out there that you can do outside ChatGPT. For example, autonomous navigation, self-driving cars. These are all examples. However, what we need is to develop some new technologies to make the AI applicable to humanity. Okay. Now, AI has very severe limitations if you use what is known as large language models. So ChatGPT is the name of the product that OpenAI has introduced. Chatbot is the generic name for that kind of technology, and large language models are the underlying science. So large language models are very, you can almost say wasteful of energy, and they're also very wasteful of computing resources. The two are not necessarily the same. So for example, when you ask ChatGPT a question, answering that question costs between $200 to $200. And there is no way you can scale that up to cover all of the potential applications. Also, the potential of AI is in what are known as edge devices. For example, your cell phones. There is no way you can run this kind of a model on a cell phone with limited battery power and also limited computing power. But the most important one is what I have put in the maroon color, which is the chatbot technology is primarily designed to give you plausible answers, not necessarily accurate answers. Because the whole modeling methodology is based on predicting the most likely output based on the past history. So this means it cannot be used, for example, for teaching subjects like physics and mathematics, where there is a right answer, but that means others are also wrong answers. So if you want to handhold children to learn the right technology, right answer, this is not necessarily the appropriate solution. So what is the correct solution? You have to marry large language modeling methodology with another thing called automated verification. Now, as our American friends say, there's good news and there's bad news. The bad news is that there's no technology at the moment that marries automated verification with large language model. The good news is fixing this gap requires only theoretical research. Therefore, it's not very costly. It does take time. I don't think you can get the answer tomorrow, but it's not very costly. So you have to invest in that. Okay. So my ambition, especially with the goal of promoting inclusion, which was the theme of this session, was the following. So one of the biggest problems in India is the primary and secondary education is very poor. The teachers are poor to non-existent. Textbooks are poor to non-existent. So we are essentially building a skyscraper on a foundation made of bamboo sticks. So this is not sustainable. So in order to address this, we have to provide high quality primary education and secondary education. And hiring more teachers is not the answer, because the new teachers you hire are not necessarily going to be competent. They just fill up the jobs. So what you have to do is to come up with some tools that will enable the students to learn at their own pace, verify whether they're doing things right or wrong, and adjust. It is not enough to say your answer is wrong. And if you are interested in doing this in the student's own mother tongue, the technology should be able to facilitate this. Okay? And if people want to switch to an English medium at some point in time, that should also be possible. So, with a few like-minded people, we have put together a proposal to make all these things possible. And aside from the technical researchers like myself, we have also identified some groups that can field test these methodologies and give us valuable feedback. Developing this technology should cost no more than 300 to 500 crores over a 3-year period. Now, once the technology is developed, disseminating and popularizing it is a job of the government of India or other philanthropists. But this does exist, and in my opinion, this is something that we as a nation have to do. So with 13 seconds left, I better stop there, I guess. Thank you.
I think Dr. Vidyasagar focused on the existing AI limitations and in the current LLM chatbot-based models, and he's saying that making it more purposeful for education is feasible, and it is also not likely to be very costly. So we will take him up on that and how to develop that further, both from a policy and private sector perspective in our Q&A. Now I turn to Mr. Narayan Vaidyanathan, and thank you for your understanding for breaking up the order. Please, over to you for your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have, I think I've got a slide loaded. Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Narayanan. I'm with ACCA, which is the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants. For context, we're a professional member body. We provide a qualification in accountancy and finance, and we have about 500,000 students doing that qualification around the world, with about 70,000 students doing that qualification in India. So my perspective and our view on AI is from that lens of education and also the work that accountancy and finance professionals do. The topic of the discussion here is about being thoughtful about artificial intelligence. It's a good time to do that because this thing is scaling. It's already started scaling. It's going to scale even more. So it's a good time to be thoughtful. Being thoughtful is necessary, but not sufficient, and it needs to be accompanied by action as well. So in terms of making a starting point on being thoughtful, for us, there are two foundational principles about what being thoughtful looks like. The first is consideration for the public interest. So what I mean by that is the greatest good for the greatest number of people. The fact of the matter is that society is unequal. Those inequalities are deep. They're often long-running inequalities. And they're not specific to any one country. It's not just an India thing. It's a global thing. AI has an exponential characteristic to it. So if this is not thought through properly, existing inequalities will be exacerbated. They're going to get even worse. So it's really important to think about how the power of this technology is harnessed in that context. The second foundational principle for us in terms of being thoughtful is diverse multi-stakeholder involvement. What I mean by that is, so we're training accountancy and finance professionals. We're not AI people, we're not tech people. Does that mean that we shouldn't be part of the conversation? Absolutely not, because any use case in accountancy and finance is useless, and we've seen it firsthand, without that domain understanding of how it plays out in an accountancy and finance context. And that's just one example. There are people across society who understand different societal issues, different industries, different sectors, and all of them need to be brought along to create the right kind of solutions in a very inclusive way. That's when you're going to have the foundations to make this work properly. So when you put all that together in terms of navigating the way forward, and the topic also talks about threats and opportunities. So very quickly, so some high-level opportunities. One is it's probabilistic AI, right? So it learns bottom-up from the data. It makes it more dynamic than a rules-based software. The other thing is it can deal with unstructured data, right? So historically, particularly in accounting and finance, it's a lot of rows and columns and structured information, numbers. Now you've got text, you've got audio, you've got video. This is all new and new sources of insight. Also, some high-level threats, bias in the training data is an issue. Dr. Anjali talked about it, so I'm not going to dwell on that. Trust and ethics is another big important factor. If you're getting something out of a system and nobody's able to tell you how it arrived at that conclusion, why is my loan application rejected, somebody else is accepted, and if there isn't a clear, transparent way of explaining that, that's going to erode trust, and that's going to affect scalability as well in the long run. So those are some high-level threats and opportunities, but I wanted to focus more on our domain, which is employment and education. So when we think about accountancy and finance, we see a lot of emerging use cases. So if you think about the audit process, right? Anomaly detection is something that we're seeing a lot of products in. If you've got millions of transactions, you want to figure out which ones look dicey, which ones look potentially fraudulent. There are some good products coming through the system to try and help with that. Generative AI is relatively picking up now, textual analysis. If you've got, again, in the audit workflow, you've got a contract, I don't know, on page 149, there's a termination clause that affects the risk profile of this company that you're looking at. And that's useful if you can do that at scale using generative AI products. But the one thing I would say is where we really see the value with the companies we talk to is in terms of the partnering between the human and the AI. We don't really see people that comfortable just leaving the AI to produce something on its own and trusting it without any other further involvement. So that human in the loop element, because often, first of all, there's something around business context and situational understanding. A lot of machine learning algorithms learn by looking at what's happened in the past in the training data. And often in many business situations, just because something was done a certain way in the past doesn't automatically mean it's what you want to do right now. So there's some things around that. There are things around ethical judgment. So for a variety of reasons, that partnering between the human and the technology is extremely important. And where we see the most powerful use cases are often where, in addition to the type of partnering I'm describing, there's also an embedding in the organization in terms of the organizational processes and in terms of being able to have governance and safeguards. That's when we see the most successful use cases coming through. But all of this partnering requires education and skills. Accounting people and finance people aren't trained in AI automatically. So there's a huge piece around education, and Dr. Vidyasagar also was referring to that. We see that in multiple ways. We actually, earlier, a few months ago, made a quick decision to do a online education seminar for our stakeholders on AI. And to our surprise, 20,000 people turned up for it. So that tells us there's a huge hunger to learn within our domain. Within our qualification in accountancy, we've started including information about AI, which is something we wouldn't have done 5, 7, 10 years ago. And this speaks a little bit to my point at the start around we need to take action alongside being thoughtful. I think some of the things around the content of what we teach is one side of it. The other side of it is around delivery mechanisms. One of the things we find interesting with AI is that historically with technology, there's been a trade-off, right? Between if you want volume, then you have to standardize, and if you want to customize, then you need to reduce your volume. AI is the first technology in the education space we've seen where you can personalize at scale. So we're doing a lot of stuff around exploring adaptive learning for a huge number of learners around the world. We've also set up a chatbot so that we have 24/7 fairly intelligent support that we can provide to our students and pointing them to different types of study resources and materials. So ultimately, the way we see this whole journey is that we don't really see AI as, we're not tech evangelists who think technology is the answer to everything under the sun. And we also don't think that there's a doomsday scenario where AI is going to blow up, where we hope it's not going to blow up everything. So our general instinct is to see practical solutions somewhere in the middle ground. That's where we think there's value. That's where we think the organizations we speak to see value for us to relearn, unlearn, retrain. It's inevitable that there will be some disruption, particularly at the lower end of more routine tasks. But we see a huge opportunity also to partner with the technology, to retrain, and to also move up the skills value chain, to be doing more and more insight-driven work and interesting work alongside supporting all of our stakeholders in the organizations that we work with from an accounting and finance point of view. So I think I'm just about coming up to time, but happy to discuss further as we go along. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Vaidyanathan. You said AI could be used for education purposes. It can be personalized and at scale. And Dr. Vidyasagar said the existing technology allows you to give plausible answers where it is not, therefore it is not good to teach subjects which require precise answers rather than plausible answers. So we need to vary. But I also wondered, in the light tribune, you put one slide as way forward, and then you made that man stand at the beginning of that square, and he never moved forward. So are we in that position vis-a-vis AI? I mean, that we are all lost? Is that, what is the message you were trying to convey? Maybe we can come back to that later. Okay. So now I turn to, I welcome Mr. Sharanya Krishnan, the Secretary, Ministry of Electronics, Information and Technology. Just to bring him up to date, we have had 3 speakers so far. Dr. Anjali Majumdar, Dr. Vidyasagar, followed by Mr. Vaidyanathan. So now I invite Mr. Shekhar Subramaniam. Do you have any presentation? No. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. So I'll begin by saying we are an Applied AI Institute, and I will uncover the aspects of thoughtfulness, but the first principle is that you learn AI by doing AI. We are in the social space, and by definition, my market is the rural population, the underserved population in India. We release our solutions to that world. So when you are in that space, the responsibility and the thinking process in terms of everything that you do is significantly magnified. Because your end user is not going to be a person who may be able to clearly articulate their problems. So the first principle that we use is to listen very carefully and to understand the problems that are encountered by the individuals for whom we are trying to use AI. So the first principle, I'll use these as aphorisms because I'll not have time. We do so much AI, there's a lot to discuss on this. The first principle is when you're doing AI, don't talk about AI, just talk about the problem. Make sure that you focus exclusively on understanding the entire problem thoroughly, which means you have to be unbiased. And that's where biases emerge. You have to be very careful about your past, and you have to not translate your past experience arbitrarily into problem solving. You have to have the intellect to be able to apply on the problem. You have to listen and understand. We call it proximal dialogues. An enormous amount of time needs to be spent in understanding the situations in which AI will work. That's the first part of being thoughtful. Because if you define the problem with clarity in a nuanced manner, by recognizing what AI can and cannot do, and in many instances, you may go in with the theory that AI will solve this problem, but it will not. You need a simple rule-based system. You need a simple alternate technology. So because you have a hammer, don't look for nails. Look for the problem and then the solution. The second principle that we use is the design of the construct of AI. We don't worry too much about the details of AI. We have all the scientists that can solve that. AI is not a rule-based system. Therefore, by definition, systems like this will have a residual error rate. What does that mean? Even with the accuracy or whatever prediction mechanics of 99%, 1% in 100 will get the wrong answer. As far as that person is concerned, AI didn't work for them. You have to think of that as part of your solution. Once more, this has less to do with the AI algorithm and the methodology and the data. It's a lot more to do with systems thinking. I will invoke Peter Senge from MIT. You have to think at a systemic level to understand what are the principal problems that AI can solve in a very thoughtful and careful manner. Third, contextual data. The ability to be able to ensure that your data accurately reflects the environment of deployment is extremely important. Therefore, successful AI inverts it. Successful AI says deployment first. Think deployment. Don't worry about the AI. It is your deployment environment that will give you the constraints, the difficulties, the challenges, the way you have to solve the problem. If you kick that ball down the field and think that you've got a very good solution in a controlled environment, you will get it wrong. Why? By definition, the first model that you build in AI will have a small set of data. You are not going to get a representative data across the entire community where you're going to implement it in. Then you might as well do the best you can with the small amount of data, understand the deployment environment, and surprisingly, compared to software projects, the entire fun in AI starts after deployment. It is when you start metaphorically moving a few miles away from your first point of deployment that you will uncover the kind of challenges, problems, usages, the assumptions that you made that will work but do not. And if you are unwilling and incapable of understanding those problems, AI will fail. So that's the next principle. And finally, or one more, you have to design AI, particularly in the social space, not as feature-rich applications, but as prescriptive applications. Why? When the user using your AI solution is probably holding a device, say a smartphone, in a rural community in India, in a very rudimentary manner, they've had a few applications, they don't know a lot about it. They don't need 16 drop-downs and 15 radio buttons. They need two things to do, and they need the system to drive the result. This is completely different from the way people are used to thinking about systems and rollout. Again, this is very thoughtful. Last piece, you must have the ability to ensure that at each stage of the matter, you are analyzing the performance of AI along multiple dimensions to ensure that it is performing according to your need. You should ensure that there are not certain pockets where biases are emerging. AI has a huge potential if thought through responsibility. Alternately, it has huge problems if it is not. AI can truly create a market of one. It can celebrate the independence of every human being being unique. It can deliver healthcare, education, and other solutions customized for one. We have an oral reading fluency which is rolled out across an entire state where we give a paragraph and each student gets a chance to see how they're pronouncing words, how they're mispronouncing words. We have a cough against TB where we uncover a TB signal in a cough. That's a very individualized situation. Like this, if you approach AI with humility, my first principle is we have to get away from one aspect, which is our biased thinking. I want to resurrect thinking. We need to stop being and start getting to a whiteboard with a marker, 2 or 3 cups of tea, a couple of samosas, and spend a few hours thinking. We don't do that enough. And if you don't do that enough, where is thoughtful going to come? If we are slaves to an external conditioned environment, we will never be thoughtful. And it has nothing to do with X, with Y. It is just the human nature that we have fallen prey to. Good AI requires independent, thorough, expansive, multiple complex areas to be addressed, connecting the dots you do not see, looking for tacit matters that you can solve. This is difficult work. Therefore, my suggestion that if we need to do AI well is make sure that as human beings who are addressing this, we are skilled appropriately to address the challenges rather than blame the external world. Thank you.
Mr. Shekhar Subramaniam, I was wondering while I was listening to you intently, I hope, whatever you were saying could have been very well applied to a general context, not just with respect to the AI context, about being unbiased, about approaching problems with an open mind on a clean slate, etc. So maybe if we get a chance, and I hate using these words use case, I would love you to illustrate that with in the specific context of AI, if time permits. But it was as good a philosophical exposition of how ideally we are expected to behave, not just with respect to AI, but with respect to several challenges that we face. Thank you for that. Professor Piskorski, please, over to you.
I have no slides, but I decided to stand up because once you sit down, your own energy goes down a little bit. So I was figured if I stand, I'll be a little bit more energetic. I wanted to share with you a little experiment. You guys were a part of a little experiment that was ongoing. As you guys were speaking, I should have asked you earlier, but I actually used our IMD ChatGPT OpenAI implementation, which is secure, to actually continue to transcribe some of your speeches and summarize them and see if I can get ChatGPT to give us a little bit of a speech at the end to say if there is something interesting. So bear with me. But just a quick introduction. So I lead executive education for IMD globally, and we're a very unique business school in that we're almost exclusively focused on executive education. So I come to you actually with a lot of experience of talking to numerous executives like yourselves on AI and what we can do with AI. So I just want to share some of these things with you, and many of them will actually resonate with the topics that you heard earlier today. So the first thing I always share with everybody, I have this big slide, which I suppose I should have brought in here, that says YET, Y-E-T. And the reason why I say yet always is many times I hear many executives like yourselves come in and say, but you know what, AI cannot do this. And I always say, yet. Because the technology is moving at such incredibly fast speed that what is actually true today, or what is not true today, it ends up being true in 6 months' time. So one of the things that we heard earlier today is that we don't have technology for AI to check itself, but actually, as of 3 weeks ago, we do with the release of the Mini O1 models by ChatGPT or OpenAI, which actually do a lot of the self-checking components. The key message for me here is, as you're looking at AI, please, please, please spend an incredible amount of time really examining what's new and how you can catch up with it. And it's really difficult and time-consuming, so I'm really glad you're coming to conferences like this, because it really does allow you the possibility to stay abreast of what's happening, because the changes are really, really fast. I mean, remember, just a few days ago, we were apparently not able to do qubits, right? We were not to do really, really fast computing until Google showed up a few days ago and said, you know what, we solved this, right? And, you know, did they solve this perfectly? No. Is it contained to only a particular small types of problems? Yes, but, you know, quantum computing has now gone through yet another breakthrough that we all knew was coming, and now has arrived. So now we are waiting for another set of engineering advancements in order to get there. So please, please, please continue to stay this. Second thing, which I also was, one of my previous speakers talked about, is please do not really think of AI as one big thing. And I think this is very, very pertinent when you make a distinction between the rule-based AI that one of our first speakers talked about, machine learning, and generative AI that obviously came out of machine learning. To me, particularly again, as I talk to executives, I always emphasize how different we have, how different AI is once you move from rule-based learning to machine learning. And the machines, don't forget, learn from mistakes. Machines don't learn by humans telling them what to do. Machines end up learning by taking what they think is the best outcome, implementing it, seeing if it worked, and then failing more often than not and learning out of that. And so the essence of machine learning is really running around in a loop and learning again and again and again and again from mistakes. And one of the things that we often forget is we build organizations, we'll build societies, we build cities for lack of failure. And in some fundamental way, we therefore are always sort of faced with this problem of, okay, well, we don't want anybody to die, and yet some of the best ways to learn from machine learning is for bad things to happen. And so how do we reconcile this, and how do we build these environments where machines can learn without harming humans? Case in point, it took us an incredible amount of time to really figure out how to do autonomous driving, right? Why? Because if we're writing rules by hand, human learning didn't really progress very far. When we went to machine learning, how do we teach machines how to drive? Well, we taught them how to drive by watching us drive. And how do we drive? Well, we drive not to kill anybody, which is a good thing, right? But unfortunately, that's not very good for machines, so machines didn't go very far. And it's only once we actually move to the point of creating artificial cities through makers of computer games and having artificial software driving in artificial cities, then we actually taught machines how to drive, because they could fail fast, fail at scale, and yet not injure anybody. So again, for me, one of the critical components is when we talk AI, stop people, ask them always to say, which AI do you mean? And if it's machine learning type of AI, where machines learn on their own through mistakes, ask the question, have you created a right environment as an executive for machines to learn at scale, and particularly learn by failing fast, which is something that, again, organizations or our environments are not very good at. The third thing I want to say is very related and very close to my heart. And it's actually very close to my heart because I was a dean for Asia for many, many years, and actually started our IMD collaboration with CII. And one of the things that has always differentiated IMD from other business schools is that we teach by what we call unscripted interactive methods. So this stands in a marked contrast to what you might know from Harvard Business School, where I had taught for about 15 years before coming to IMD. At Harvard Business School, we always used to teach by the case method, where everything was scripted. It was highly interactive, very entertaining, but we knew exactly what we wanted the conversation to be in. After all you could do is discuss a case. At IMD, we teach through this unscripted interactive method, which basically says we have an idea and we will immediately apply it to you. And this was very, very present in your conversation when you said, yeah, that's brilliant, but unfortunately that doesn't scale, because I cannot possibly hold in my head 15 different topics of 15 different applications to 15 different industries that might be represented in this room. And so for us, what's really amazing about this Gen AI opportunity that's coming is how do we actually take some of these methodologies, and not only we make them personalized, but we also actually make them interactive. And not only we make them interactive, but we also make them very, very tailored to you, and we can speak to you in your language in the way you want to be taught. And the reason why I mentioned this here is, to my mind, this is a huge, huge opportunity for India. As you know, India is gunning to become the third largest economy in the world. And of course, in order for India to achieve that, we're going to have to invest in education, and we're going to have to invest in education at scale. And again, to me, something like generative AI, particularly when it's applied to education, interactive education delivered in a local language, but also something that the learner can understand and apply to herself, and I really mean herself, because of gender inequalities that can be leveraged by this, are a huge, huge opportunities for the country as well as the globe. So thank you so much, and I'll give you the summary of all the speeches later on if you're interested. Thank you.
We don't know whether he used AI to time, but his timing of his remarks was perfect. As the screen flashed, time is up, he really wound up. So that was a very precise way of oh yeah, I should have remembered that. Yes. No, I think. Thank you. I'll come back to you with some questions, because I'll now move on to Ms. Debyani Ghosh, currently Distinguished Fellow, Niti Aayog, Government of India.
Thank you. You know, sometime back when LLMs were new and everybody was hyperventilating about ChatGPT and LLMs and what the magic that they are, if you all remember, there was a particular incident where somebody asked, I don't remember whether it was ChatGPT or one of the others, but asked one of the models, what is the one thing that we can do to get rid of pollution in the world? It was, I mean, I'm paraphrasing the question. It was along those lines. And guess what was the answer? Anyone remembers? Get rid of all humans, right? I mean, that was the obvious answer. And of course, if you're on social media, Twitter and everything just blew up. AI wants to kill us, right? AI is evil. It wants to kill us. We asked this question, and this was the answer. I remember I was taking a workshop around that time in one of the universities, and this came up. Everybody was talking about it. And I got them to go back to the same model, ask the same question, just add a little bit of a different context to it to say, how do we remove pollution to make the planet a much more livable place for human beings? The answer was completely different. So who's the problem here? Is it the technology, or is it how we are using the technology? And I think this is the first point I want to put in front of you. I think in this growing hype about AI, somewhere we are very, very conveniently forgetting about human accountability and human ingenuity. And I think this is one of the biggest problems with today's AI narrative. Today, when you look at it, recently, one of the leading AI CEOs went on to say that I don't care how many billions of dollars I spend, but I'm going to spend whatever is needed till I get to AGI, right? And this is not just one person. You're hearing this from Silicon Valley, from quite a few of the AI leaders, right? From a lot of the Western AI leaders. And what happens? Then there are questions about, oh, but what happens to people if AI is as good as people? What happens to jobs? What happens to this? And then it very conveniently becomes, but this is now government's problem. We are developing this. You have to figure out regulation so that the safeguards or guardrails are there. This model is a flawed model. And I think this is what we have to challenge. Because when you think of a digital model, I mean, think of it as a circle within a circle. Today, the entire AI hype has put the technology in the center. And then everything else is an afterthought. So what happens to human beings? What happens to planet? What happens to jobs, et cetera, these are all afterthoughts. And the answer to all these problems is regulation. I think it's high time that we actually started challenging this model versus accepting it, to say that why should we be putting technology in the center? Now imagine if we rewrote the narrative with the human in the center. And if we were thinking about what does it take for for all of us to have a good life? What does it take to ensure that we all have jobs, we all have access to education, we have access to healthcare, clean air to breathe, clean water? And we then started thinking about technology in terms of where does it solve, what problems can it solve, what can it do? I mean, the only thing, I really liked what Shekhar said, the only thing I disagree with, I don't think there's any good AI or bad AI. But there's definitely good human intentions and bad human intentions. And I think we have to shine the light where it needs to be shined. It's amazing to see how much we are letting go of our own role, our own accountability in this world of AI. And that is what scares me the most. I'm not that worried about AI becoming super intelligent or AI, people saying AI is going to reason. Already somebody has come out saying their latest LLM is capable of reasoning, and we have found a lot of problems with it. You know, if you continue to throw never-ending money at it, data, compute, and brute engineering force at it, you will continue to get it to improve. It's an engineering process. So you will continue to get it to improve. But getting it to improve in a way that is safe, that is responsible, is the requirement. And not just getting it to improve and then saying regulation has to fix it all. I think that's the issue we have to really solve for. And that's the human-centric model that we talk about, which I think is the need of the hour. It's one of the most important requirements of today. And this is where I also believe India has that golden opportunity to stand up and lead the world with respect to setting the right expectations and showing what it has to look like because of what we have been able to do with inclusive tech, with DPI, et cetera, et cetera. I do believe we have the ability, we have the legs to walk the talk. So I think this is going to be the biggest need. And, you know, going back to one of the things the CEA mentioned, it's not just countries with aging population that need AI. I do believe that AI is such a transformative technology. Every country can benefit. I believe India needs AI because we've set for ourselves such an ambitious goal of saying that in the next 20 years, we are going to grow from 4 trillion to 30 trillion GDP, right? That's transformative. That is not going to happen by just linear growth. That is transformation of pretty much every aspect of economy and society as we know. And this is where the power of technologies like AI needs to be harnessed. So yes, we need AI too for different reasons. We need it for the transformation power that it brings to it. But we need to create a different framework. We need to put human accountability and focus in the center. And we really need to build, I think, together with like-minded countries, a human-centric approach to AI, because once again, there is no bad AI, there is no good AI. I think for a very long time, it will be us humans who will decide that usage. Thank you.
I'm told that due to some unavoidable circumstances, I have to finish the session with Mr. Krishnan's remarks. There may not be time for Q&A, I'm told. Sorry about that. So we will leave a lot of questions about both artificial and natural intelligence unanswered at this point, because what Ms. Debyani Majumdar said was that it is not the technology, it's about humans, but that's most of the time that's the case. If humans are going to be relatively, with all our imperfections, and if we are given an extremely powerful tool, does our track record give us a sense of hope and encouragement that we will know how to put it to use smartly, equitably, fairly, judiciously, etc.? So, or are we giving a kid with a loaded gun? So that is the question that will remain, unfortunately, unanswered at this point in this panel because of the time constraints that we face. So, and also some of these public policy questions, why Dr. Sagar spoke about the use of education, and I take your point that it is useful for a country like India, and Dr. Sagar spoke about the role of AI in education, but there are much bigger questions. So, for example, if you combine it with what's happening in energy transition, where you are replacing internal combustion engines with electric vehicles, so you have a whole set of mechanical engineers and mechanical engineering trained people becoming redundant, chemical engineers in demand, and you make those vehicles autonomous, then the kind of unemployment you will be creating will be not only those who were trained to manufacture ICEs and also trained as truck and automobile drivers. Then what does it do to public policy? Where do we generate the revenues to compensate people, to train people, etc., etc.? Those are all the important, fascinating questions that unfortunately we can't, explore in greater detail. We will ask CIA to organize one more forum soon enough on that separately. But without much further ado, I invite Mr. Krishnan, Secretary, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, to make his the panel remarks and also probably the closing remarks for this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair and Dr. Ananth Nageshwaran. I'd also prefer to speak from here just so that I can possibly address some of the issues from a perspective of what the government is attempting to do, especially in being thoughtful about the way that we would apply AI in the Indian context. We have experts here, and I think the first element of thoughtfulness of what the government is attempting to do is to take a very inclusive and democratized approach in terms of there's a constant, and we've had several consultations with a range of experts, including some who are on this panel here today, in what kind of approach we need to take on different elements of the India AI mission, and including how the India AI mission itself was designed. Many of you are familiar, the India AI mission was launched in March this year, total outlay of 10,372 crore, of which the biggest chunk actually relates to creating compute capacity in India, because the global south generally and countries like India in particular shouldn't get lost out in this entire AI race if you don't have enough access to compute capacity. That was the first thought there, and therefore that needs to be created. Then the issue came as to how do you create it? Do you just buy out the capacity? Do you create it in the public sector, or do you create it in the public, on a public-private partnership mode through a viability gap funding? Then we figured that the quickest way of doing it is to harness some of the efficiency of the private sector, so bring in the private sector. But at the same time, if you do it on a viability gap funding mode, then it means that someone who's already established it doesn't really get a chance to participate, and it really works only for those who are setting it up new. So which is why we decided we would do it on almost a voucher-based kind of system, where we empanel a number of people who would be able to provide that capacity from within the country, including those who have already started working on it, and thereafter subsidize it to those who really need it, including researchers, academic institutions, innovators, and so on. So that's the model that we've gone with. The bids are out, and we've received fairly good response. About 19 companies are in the fray, and we should be able to finalize that quickly. So and of course, it leaves us with the option of establishing an independent AI capacity. Nothing stops us from doing it again on a VGF mode, or even doing it purely as a public sector offering, which some countries have resorted to. So that's one part of being thoughtful about the way we are doing this. The second major aspect is actually deploying a foundational model. A lot was said about biases and what happens with biases, and therefore do you need a model that needs to be deployed in the Indian context. So we said, okay, we will have a provision, make it as wide as possible, not just a large language model, but a large multimodal model, so that other forms of inputs in terms of speech and video and pictures and everything else can go into it, and also something that would address all the concerns about multiple languages being used in this country, and how do you sort of get them to converse with each other. So that was another big initiative which we wanted to launch. But that is the one pillar of the India AI mission which is yet to take off fully, simply because although the Ministry of Higher Education has called for proposals for setting up 3 centers of excellence, none of them has yet been tasked with the foundation model. There is some preliminary work going on there. And one of the main reasons there is, how do you actually make AI work? Now, is it, as Mr. Shekhar pointed out, is it worth actually investing in the AI technology and reinventing the wheel all over again? Or should we look at the application base of it? Should you look at small models which will actually address issues which relate to particular sectors? So the jury is really out on that, and we are in the process of further consultations to see which of these approaches we need to take in the Indian context. The other big element is really about the data set platform. And there, I don't think there's much doubt that data really needs to be cleaned up, made available in a usable format, and their work is going ahead in association with a number of ministries and other institutions to see how we can make that happen. The fourth element is applications, and applications, to our mind, is the most important thing that needs to be done within this entire AI framework. And there are about at least 25 areas that we intend to target, saying we should have applications which work in these areas: health, education, agriculture, small and medium enterprises. These are areas which suggest themselves immediately and with which we are engaging currently. And more, of course, can always be done, and we would love to do them in a range of areas where this can actually happen. And we've called for proposals. The first call got us about 900 responses, and the second call is open right now as the first set of applications are currently being evaluated. Then the whole issue comes up around skilling, and skilling is probably the most important element here. The AI Stanford Index and so on do say that India has the greatest potential in terms of STEM skilling to address this area. We have a young population. We have a number of people who are going through engineering and science education who can actually take up work in this area. And very often, the one possibility which is being pointed out, and something which NASSCOM, Debjani's former organization, is also thinking about, is whether AI would be the Y2K moment for Indian technology executives, and whether we can really do applications for the rest of the world, and is that the way we offset some of the unemployment which may result in certain other of the areas where AI application may result in jobs being lost. So that is one part of it. Then the next element, so which is why skills is very important. Across the level, it's important, and it's also important that it's taught to everybody, not just to those who become PhDs or people who build the models, but also to those who need to know how to use them across their own disciplines. Then the other important element is to fire up startups and help innovators to actually do it, help them with some initial investments so that they can go forward and work in this particular space. And that is, again, funding which is available. Many have already started, and we are working through the MeitY Startup Hub to make sure that it becomes far more available to more innovators and more new businesses to take up. Which brings me to the last element, and I'll try and tie this all together, and that is on safe and trusted AI. And there was mention made of what needs the responsibility that AI has. And in the Indian context and in the context of the India AI mission, we have tried to make a subtle distinction between what the West normally calls responsible AI and what we call safe and trusted AI. Responsible AI seems to put the fundamental responsibility primarily on those who are actually putting together the models, people who start it up and say, okay, you need to be responsible, you have to make sure that you don't do too much of harm, and don't expect the government to regulate. Safe and trusted AI, on the other hand, balances it out and says that, all right, I mean, you need to innovate, you do the innovation, try and be responsible about it, but there would be an assessment and we would try and see that it is safe and trusted in a manner that works for everybody. So that is the other space that we are working on right now. And quite frankly, our approach to regulation, because that again came up in this context, is that we don't want to start with regulation. And regulation, in a sense, would actually hurt innovation in this particular space. And there are three major issues that we need to regulate against, in a sense. One is the kind of typical harms that everyone talks of misrepresentation and deepfakes. In that space, we have enough laws in this country, in India specifically, under the IT Act and other laws, and under the IT rules, to actually act on misrepresentation, which is a crime in a different sense. The whole issue that AI poses is how quickly you're able to act technology-wise, and how quickly you're able to detect the deepfakes. So there is a different challenge. The legal framework may be adequate, but there's a challenge of getting people to comply and comply more quickly. The second part of what needs to happen is, of course, the job loss, and we looked at the job loss element separately in terms of skilling people to take up jobs which could possibly supplant some of the other jobs. And our concerns with regard to job loss in India, particularly with generative AI, are probably not as intense as in the West, where office jobs and white-collar jobs are a lot more than what they are here. So that is the second element of regulation. Third element of regulation is really about how personal data is used or how other data is used in terms of copyrights and so on. There again, I think we've enacted the DPDP Act already. The rules are awaited and they should be out shortly. And that takes care to some extent of how personal data gets used. And there is a balance which has been struck there between privacy and the use of data with consent. And the other element of that regulation is really copyrights, and that needs to be fought out based on Indian law in the courts, which is already going on, and we'll have some clarity there. So given net-net, the only aspect that we have not addressed in Indian law already, or which is an area of concern, is what is called the existential crisis. And I think the existential crisis is probably some distance away, and we shouldn't worry ourselves too much about what AI will do to us, and we need to sort of just exploit its honest potential to improve lives for Indians, enhance productivity, and probably help us really grow into a developed nation in the next couple of decades. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Krishnan. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a topic on which questions are numerous and answers are few. And we have a very diverse and distinguished panel, so I'm sure most of you would have been looking forward to the opportunity to ask questions, but due to circumstances, we have to truncate this session at this point, and I thank you very much for your understanding. Please stay behind for the valedictory session starting soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nageswaran, for that lovely moderation and for all the panelists. May I request all of us to gather just outside the stage? We have a little memento for you. Thank you so much for this insightful panel.